Broncos country will be waking up on Christmas Day with a special gift. That is a football game. Who do the Broncos play on Christmas Day as we look ahead to that? Plus, we finalize our Get to Know You series, taking a look at Matt Henningsen and Faion Hicks out of Wisconsin, the Broncos' final two picks of the 2022 NFL Draft. You get that and much more in today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter at Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger. He covers the Denver Broncos over at predominantlyorange.com as their site expert, and here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. Broncos country, thank you once again for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You can get this podcast free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format, and also subscribe here on YouTube for daily Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage. Sayre, it was great waking up yesterday to find out that the Denver Broncos, they are going to be playing a game on Christmas Day. I tell you what, will it be a stocking stuffer this year, or will there be coal in the Broncos stocking? I mean, obviously there's a lot of storylines that'll have to play out throughout the season before we figure that out, but hey, the Broncos playing on Christmas, I'm stoked about it.
Me too, Cody. I love it. There's nothing better than Christmas for me. I absolutely love that time of year. Plus, with having the Broncos, I mean, they haven't had the greatest success in recent years on Christmas, so they're due, I feel like. So it kind of just, we get to see them go to Los Angeles, play the LA Rams, one of Russell Wilson's old arch nemesis in the NFC West there. So I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to it. A Week 16 matchup, obviously, like you said, very late in the season. But now we know two Broncos games this year, Cody. We know the Week 8 game is going to be in London against the Jaguars. And now we know Week 16 in Los Angeles against Matthew Stafford and the reigning champion Los Angeles Rams.
I saw Eric Dalala, the Broncos lead writer over there, denverbroncos.com. He put a tweet out saying, like, because of the fact that, hey, Denver's traveling to London, that game obviously have a nationally televised appeal to it. Same with the Christmas Day game. That doesn't actually count against the allotment for the amount of games the Broncos can have on national TV. So I think one thing we can expect, especially with this AFC West division, Sayre, the Broncos are going to be on TV quite a bit. And especially with I'd say the looming report that we have just now recently found out that the Broncos, they could be sold for an estimated $5 billion to whoever decides to purchase the team next. That is the estimated valuation for where the team will sell. Like, that is a huge payday. So the Broncos become an even more massive market. You introduce a new owner, you introduce a brand new quarterback, an exciting revamped, hopefully, offense, and a lot of promising defensive players. Oh yeah, and a brand new head coach. Tell you what, hey, people are going to be watching the Broncos here this upcoming season. This is a great, I'd say, marketing appeal here for this team and also for Broncos country.
It really is. I mean, in recent years, like I know in Nebraska, I've had to buy Sunday ticket every year for the last handful of years. And the reason for that is that, well, the Broncos really aren't on TV a lot here in this market, which, I mean, I grew up in South Dakota, as you know, Cody, and the Broncos were on pretty much every week. I mean, I never really had to worry about getting Sunday ticket or seeing the Broncos on TV because they were typically the team that made it onto that main window in the late afternoon CBS game. So that hasn't been the case for the last 4, 5, 6 almost years now. So now the Broncos are going to be getting primetime spots plus a lot of nationally televised. They call it, like they call it America's Game of the Week or different things like that. So, I mean, they're going to be getting a lot of those every single week. The Broncos are going to be in the spotlight. I think those 12 o'clock start times are those windows where they're not really being featured. I think those days are kind of in the past.
Week 16 for both the Rams and for the Broncos is when they meet up on Christmas Day. Obviously, I'll be there in Los Angeles. I'm looking forward to providing that coverage and kind of sharing that here with you and Broncos country, Sayre. But like for the Broncos, I think a big storyline is going to be, how does Russell Wilson play against a team that has historically had a lot of success against him? Maybe like he's had good games, but I think collectively the Rams have always had that success over the Seahawks in recent years. This is definitely going to be a storyline that people are going to follow. But it's like for us, we don't even know what storylines are going to accompany this matchup once we get to that point in Week 16. So much could have happened in the early part of the season. This could either be a really exciting game or on paper, or it could end up being nothing because let's say one of these teams is surprisingly not as good as we thought they were. That would be tragic at this point.
Yeah, are the Rams going to have like a Super Bowl hangover this season? Or are they just going to be business as usual, right? I mean, they have had an interesting offseason. I mean, for the Los Angeles Rams, like who's going to be their main pass rusher outside of Leonard Floyd, who's maybe not necessarily a number one pass rusher as it is. With all due respect to him, we know Aaron Donald is going to do his thing, but obviously the Rams made that trade last year for Von Miller because, for some reasons. It was more than just, hey, we love star players, let's get as many as we can on the team. No, they really needed a pass rusher, and I feel like they've kind of masked the fact that they haven't added anybody there this offseason by going after guys like Allen Robinson and Bobby Wagner and those type of things. So yes, they are strong on paper. Their offense is going to be clicking just like usual, but at the same time, defensively, how much is that edge presence going to affect them over the course of a season? Like you said, we don't know how different they're going to look. My guess is they're still going to be contenders in the NFC there. They're still going to be right there in the thick of things in week 16, but it could be a super important game in terms of determining the outcome of the standings in either division, right? Yeah. I mean, for the Broncos in the AFC West, like at the end of the season, they're probably going to, it's going to be the cream rising to the top at that point. I don't think the Broncos are necessarily going to have like this huge headroom in the AFC West. So it could end up being a crucial game for them. And then for the Rams, it could be likewise. They've got some really good teams in their division. Obviously, the 49ers made it to the Final Four last season. The Arizona Cardinals, they were kind of the number one team in the league for a while. So can these teams kind of stay in the thick of things in their division and be the cream that rises to the top at the end? I think that's going to be the big storyline there for this game.
Into the thick of it is all I can think about when you said that right there. It's stuck in my head. So I see a little melody jingle right there for everybody in Broncos country. I'm excited to see what comes about for this matchup. The Broncos will have one of the 3 primetime feature games on Christmas Day. A great move, in my opinion, by the National Football League. It's going to completely blow everything out of the water. The NBA has no chance of competing with the NFL on Christmas Day. Sorry about that if you're an NBA fan. I love basketball, but they simply cannot hold a candle to the NFL on big-time holidays there. So very excited about that. But Broncos country, we're also excited to continue to get to know these Denver Broncos rookies from the 2022 NFL draft class. We're going to continue that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there at Built Bar. And Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. And one thing we will be sure of is to encourage you to buy some Built Bars for your Christmas stockings when the Broncos are playing on Christmas Day against the LA Rams. You can get one now, though, and we highly encourage you to do so by going to Built.com to check out the 9 amazing original flavors that they offer, plus the occasional limited time flavors like the Built Puffs and also the Built granola bars that come in 3 exclusive flavors over at Built.com. And they're also the healthiest protein bar that is out there on the market today because each bar contains 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. So try it out today by going to Built.com. And when you go to checkout, make sure you use promo code LOCK15, and that's going to get you 15% off your next order at Built.com. As we continue on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, real quick, mile-high salute to everybody in Broncos country. Thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast in audio format and also here on YouTube. Do us a favor. If you're a Broncos fan and you know other Broncos fans and they have not yet found Locked On Broncos, share this podcast with them and help us grow here in Broncos country. We appreciate you so much, everybody there. Sayre, my friend, we are wrapping up here today the final portions of the Get to Know You series, which we've gotten a lot of great fan feedback on, getting to know a little bit more about these players as both people and players, which I think is an important aspect about sports today. And we're going to focus on 2 Wisconsin guys here today, starting things off first with Matt Henningsen, the Broncos 6th-round defensive lineman selection there. There's a lot to like about Henningsen, in my opinion, not only just as a player, but this is a guy that is ridiculously smart. And Sayre, what were some of the comparisons we saw after he was drafted? There were people talking about, hey, he's like Good Will Hunting type smart. If anyone's ever seen that movie, you would know exactly what I'm saying. If you haven't, go find it on Netflix and go watch it. Obviously, you're missing out if you've never seen that movie. But, Sayre, what were your thoughts on Matt Henningsen being drafted by the Broncos in the 6th round? Could he play in 2022? And also anything interesting that Broncos fans should know about him?
He's definitely an interesting guy, Cody. I mean, I certainly couldn't get a master's in 5 years at college. I don't know. That would have taken me a bit longer than the Matt Henningsens of the world who got a master's. He obviously graduated in 4 years. with a degree in computer engineering. And I think that's in itself impressive. But then you go and get your master's while you're kind of on your extra year of eligibility. Oh, I'm going to get my master's. I'm going to get improved stock for the NFL draft. No big deal. Just a typical day in the life of a college athlete. Man, it's crazy to see a 4.0 student athlete at Wisconsin. And he was the first. We mentioned this on our draft episode as well, but I think it bears repeating in case anybody's hearing about Matt Henningsen for the first time. He was a redshirt freshman a few years ago. He was the first freshman walk-on ever to start a season opener for Wisconsin, at least in terms of recent history, right? So dating back 30 years, as far as anybody's been keeping track of that particular stat, Matt Henningsen is the only Wisconsin Badger in modern football to start a season opener as a freshman, a walk-on. Wow. So that's pretty insane. It speaks to his work ethic for sure.
Well, one thing about him too, just not only those traits that you have there, I think it also says a lot. Like, he can handle a significant workload, like to be able to get your master's in 5 years. Okay. You complete your bachelor's program. And then in order to take your master's and complete that, usually it takes sometimes it could take 2.5 years to get your master's degree. So that says that he took extra classes, extra credits. He tackled that on in a semester to be able to accomplish that, to get his degree before going into the NFL. That right there, very impressive, speaks to his work ethic, and I'd say in his mentality as a human being and also as a football player, which I think translates really well inside an NFL locker room. He's very, very strong too, by the way. If you watch him on the tape, he's got a great first punch, getting inside the frame of offensive linemen, pushing them back and anchoring a little bit there, which I think will translate well for him coming into the NFL. But outside of that as well, one thing we talked about in the draft process leading up that George Paton absolutely loves, guys with high RAS scores. He is a total rasshole, and we are here for it.
I love that about him too, man. That's one of the cool things about late round picks, right? Especially for guys that look, Cody and I don't evaluate 400 prospects before the NFL draft. So we rely on, okay, once the Broncos draft a guy, if we didn't scout them beforehand, we go back and watch, we go back and read what other experts are saying. This guy is an absolute freak, Cody, a 37.5-inch vertical jump at 6'3" plus 290 pounds. So, I mean, it's not like this is a smaller defensive lineman that's jumping out of the gym here. I foresee a couple of blocked kicks in this guy's future. I mean, if you're 6'3", 300 pounds, basically, I mean, and you can jump 37.5 inches, that's that's great. Wide receivers in the NFL can jump 37 inches. I mean, a really good number is to me, it's 35 and above. So for a 300-pound guy to be jumping 37.5 inches, what does that speak to? It speaks to his incredible explosiveness, which, by the way, he was in the 99.7 percentile in terms of vertical jump at the defensive tackle position. So very rare air. And like you said, as far as RAS score goes, top 100 over the last 30 years. I feel like with a guy that's this smart and a guy with that kind of athletic ability, you're going to find a place for him on your roster, and he's going to find his way to the field sooner than later.
He seems like the type of player that brings his hard hat and his lunch pail to work every single day. Blue collar mentality for him. Super smart, super efficient. I know he's got the kind of makeup and DNA, in my opinion, that I envision would be a Coach Bill Kollar guy. And obviously, we know he's now moved to a consultant role with the Broncos defense. He's still coaches up. He and Marcus Dixon, they're both working with the defensive linemen. So he could be one of these players, Sayre, that might be, when we look at the Broncos draft class and we look at maybe anybody on this roster, I feel like it wouldn't be a far stretch to say, hey, Matt Henningsen might be an under the radar player that nobody will talk enough about and could make, an instant impact on the roster on day one in the defensive rotation. A lot of us, we've talked about Ioma Uwazurike, and obviously we have high aspirations for him. I would not be shocked, though, based on what we've seen so far, if Matt Henningsen comes into training camp right away. He also might be the guy that starts the first fight. I think he might be that guy that's just going to physically piss off an offensive lineman, get the offensive lineman to swing at him, and he might cause the first fight at training camp. We might see that. Yeah. But I don't think he's going to be the guy that's going to initiate the fight. I just think he's going to frustrate somebody because he's so strong. And I tell you what, Sayre, as a player, I've had moments like this too. Sometimes you're going to go against somebody who's a little bit stronger than you, and they're going to bury your ass in the dirt a little bit. There's been times I've been planted on my ass by a wide receiver in the blocking game, Sayre, and I'm dang, this guy's in the gym more. And that just motivated me to get in the weight room a lot more and to work. And obviously I got stronger throughout my playing career, but man, this is a guy that's going to get under the skin of opposing offensive linemen. But even then, I think he's also going to command attention to a point where he creates opportunities for other guys, kind of how we used to see Derek Wolfe do so with the Broncos. And I feel like a really good comp here could be Derek Wolfe to Matt Henningsen.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And we know if there's going to be scuffles in practice, we know Dalton Reisner is going to be at the center of it. He always is. And he loves that, man. He relishes that. He's even talked about, remember he got into the little, I don't know if it got super physical with Randy Gregory during the Cowboys game, but he mentioned that he and Gregory kind of cleared the air on that. But since he was drafted, man, he's always been kind of bragging about, hey, I'm going to be the one that gets in the scuffles during practice. So, hey, Broncos country, you heard it here first. If there's a scuffle at training camp, our bets on the first fight are between Henningsen and Dalton Reisner there, the offensive line versus the defensive line. I think that's where we're going to go. But you're absolutely right, Cody. I think Derek Wolfe could be a solid comp. You see Henningsen play a lot of the kind of 3 to the outside techniques on the D line. So he does a lot of those different things. He can rush from the interior. He can kind of be that base end in a 3-4 look. But we know the Broncos are going to be interchanging their defensive linemen all throughout the season. So to have positional versatility is a must. And I think for a guy like Henningsen, with like you said, with that strong initial hand punch, he's going to occupy space. He's going to occupy blockers, and he's going to be able to clean up from other pass rushers. That was one thing that he did very well at Wisconsin, cleaning up a really great outside pass rush. The quarterback has to step up into the pocket. Henningsen can use those strong hands and those strong arms to get off his block and clean up that pass rush as the quarterback tries to break that pocket that's being collapsed. So I think he's got a bright future ahead.
Well, we just talked about one Wisconsin guy. Now we're going to talk about another coming up here in just a moment. And Faion Hicks, what do the Broncos think of him as their 7th round draft pick, and maybe how he translates to an NFL defense right away? You get that and much more coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you a quick reminder. Make sure you set your reminders. We'll put it out on YouTube. We'll put it out on social media as well. Join Sayre Bedinger and myself here for a special live episode, Locked On Broncos, on Thursday after the NFL schedule releases. We'll talk about the toughest schedule stretches for this Broncos team. We'll break down the schedule. We'll share our thoughts on potential win-loss, record predictions. You get that and much more. We want you to join us live on Thursday, shortly after 8 o'clock Eastern time, to break down all the action here for the Broncos 2022 NFL schedule release. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. We appreciate you so much for listening to us here on your favorite podcast provider or watching us here on YouTube and interacting with us down below. We appreciate it so much to everybody in Broncos country. We got to know Matt Henningsen, one Wisconsin defensive player. Now we get to know Faion Hicks, another Wisconsin defensive player, the Broncos 7th round draft selection, a cornerback out of Wisconsin here. Now, one interesting thing too, after the draft, I reached out to a Broncos staff member and I got some insight as to what they thought about Faion Hicks. And one thing that they told me was that, hey, he can move really well. He's got great leadership traits, and he has experience playing in an NFL style of defense down there at Wisconsin, which they hope will translate well to the NFL level for the defensive side of the ball. If he has to get in, they believe that he can do a really good job stepping in right away if need be for any kind of circumstance. More likely not going to be a starter, but in fact, like if your depth gets tested, they believe he can become a reliable depth player for them. They also believe he's going to be a key special teams player for them as well. Sayre, what else is there to get to know about Faion Hicks out of Wisconsin?
Yeah, I like this pick, Cody. The more and more you read about this guy, I mean, you obviously will discover, if you just give a quick Google search to Faion Hicks's name, Cody, you're going to find that not many people really scouted this guy coming out of the draft. So this is kind of a deep dive for the Broncos scouting department, and somebody that I think really turned a lot of heads at his pro day. And that was, he's kind of an unassuming prospect from the beginning, right? A 3-star guy coming out of high school, which is basically like, hey, you're an average prospect coming out. He played some running back, some defensive back in high school. And then obviously going to Wisconsin, he's playing for Jim Leonhard. And Denver Broncos fans will remember Jim Leonhard because back in Peyton Manning's first year with the team in 2012, Jim Leonhard was signed during training camp. The safety, remember him? He played for the Buffalo Bills. He played for a number of other teams. Well, a lot of times in the NFL, who matters, right? And so with Nathaniel Hackett being the head coach of the Denver Broncos, he was on the coaching staff in Buffalo, and he referenced this even when asked about these picks. He was on the coaching staff in Buffalo when Jim Leonhard was kind of playing his best ball for the Buffalo Bills. And Jim Leonhard is now the defensive coordinator at Wisconsin, who obviously the Broncos picked multiple players off that defense. And you spoke to it, Cody. I think the fact that you're playing in a pro-style defense there at Wisconsin makes a huge difference translating to the NFL, especially for somebody like Faion Hicks, who was able to get into the starting lineup very early in his college career.
Well, I think another thing about him, too, he's a very explosive athlete. They really like what he offers in terms of athletic measurables as well. And it mentions here in the show notes, he blew up the Wisconsin Pro Day. He ran a 4.37 in the 40-yard dash, which is fast. You want guys like that. So for me, immediately I'm thinking, okay, hey, he could be a gunner. He could be a guy that covers the gunners. He's got the speed to be able to do that, to help out on special teams right away. And he also had a 10-yard split of 1.48, which is ridiculous. So, we talk about the NFL sometimes. It's not always about the straight line speed. It's about how fast are you when you have to bend corners. This translates really well for him. So he can be a guy that can be a disciplined tackler. If he plays on the outside or in the nickel, we understand he can take those angles to be able to cut off a runner when need be. But also his vertical of 37.5 inches is pretty impressive as well. And he had a 3-cone of 6.78. Like, this is a guy, once again, George Paton getting a guy with very elite explosive measurables that will translate on the field for them.
And I think that gives you the much better chance to hit on late round guys, right? I mean, a lot of guys have great tape. Like we've talked about Jaquan McMillan, the defensive back the Broncos picked up from East Carolina as an undrafted free agent. Well, he had much better production last season based just purely on statistics. He had 21 pass breakups, 5 interceptions, whereas Faion Hicks, 8 pass breakups, I think, 1 interception. But the traits make such a big difference when you're talking about translatability. Also, the scheme, right? Playing for Jim Leonhard's defense, you're not necessarily looking at, hey, this guy had 21 passes broken up, although that would be awesome. But you're looking at, can he run our coverages? Can he play the different types of coverage? Because the Broncos ask guys a lot, especially under Vic Fangio and Ed Donatel. But I think the same is going to be true under Ejiro Evero and Christian Parker. I think they're going to still be asked to do a lot. And the more you can do, the better. We know that last year, the Broncos drafted Kerry Vincent Jr. out of LSU, and he was pretty strictly a nickel. I think with the 2 corners they drafted in 2022, Damari Mathis and then Faion Hicks, I feel like those guys can be interchangeable. They maybe didn't play the nickel as much in college, but I feel like they translate into an inside, outside, outside, inside, however you want to look at that, at the NFL level, which makes a huge difference. And yes, we're talking about 6th and 7th round picks today, but bear in mind, the Broncos picked up Jonathan Cooper last year in the 7th round, and it was kind of an unassuming pick on the surface. He ended up playing a big role during the season. So I wonder if we'll see the same from Faion Hicks.
It's not about where you're drafted. It's about what you do with the opportunity. And the Broncos and George Paton have seemingly investigated guys who love football, who also have high character, strong leadership traits, and some grit to them. And I think you see that with almost every single one of their NFL draft selections here in 2022. So I'm excited to get to know these guys a little bit more up close and personal, to watch them in training camp, to watch them at preseason. The storylines will write itself throughout the year, and that's what you can rely on here with Sayre Bedinger and myself. Don't forget to join us on Thursday, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, which is 6 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time, is when the Broncos schedule officially drops. Sayre Bedinger and myself, we're going to break down all the action as well. And in the meantime, to celebrate Nikola Jokic winning the MVP award, go check out the Locked On Nuggets podcast hosted by Matt Moore and Adam Mares, the best pick and roll action of all things Denver Nuggets here on the Locked On podcast. Be sure to check that out. Sayre Bedinger and myself, we got you tomorrow with the NFL schedule breakdown for the Denver Broncos.